Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Murder of an Elvis Girl, Solving the Jenny Maxwell Case, by Buddy Moorehouse, narrated by John Mclain. Wednesday, June 10th, 1981, Beverly Hills, California. What do we got here, Johnny? Robbery Homicide Division Detective Mike Thies had seen his share of grisly crime scenes during his time with the Los Angeles Police Department, and this one was right at the top. 2 victims, said John Dial, the Wilshire Division detective, who was the first one on the scene. The woman here is Jennifer Rader, age 39. Looks like 1 bullet in the temple, 1 right in the eye. They also shot her husband, Irvin. He got 1 in the stomach. He's over at Cedars-Sinai, and they don't think he's going to make it. Wait a minute, Thies said. Irvin Rader? Tip Rader? Yeah, that's him, Dial said. Tip Rader. Somebody shot Tip Rader. Holy shit. Somebody shot Tip Rader. I know that guy didn't have any shortage of enemies, but who would have actually shot him? Every cop in Los Angeles knew who Tip Rader was. Former Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy who put himself through law school and became an attorney about 20 years ago. Divorce lawyer to the stars. Also represented cops who ran afoul of the law. Ran in mob circles. Big, loud, scary. An asshole in every sense of the word. Everybody in Los Angeles who knew Tip Rader couldn't stand Tip Rader. He was always entertaining to be around, because you never knew what he was going to say or who he was going to insult, but he was utterly unlikable. But hating him is one thing. Who would have actually wanted to kill him, Thies thought. And why would they have killed his wife, too? Tip knew a lot of mob guys. Was this a mob hit? Thies's eyes began to dart around the lobby of the condo complex on South Holt Avenue. Blood everywhere, with a trail leading out to the sidewalk. Set of keys still in the door. And a beautiful blonde lying dead on the floor by the elevator, the side of her head blown away. Mike Thies kneeled down to get a better look. What did you say her name was? She looks a hell of a lot younger than Tip. Jennifer, Dial said. She went by Jenny, and yeah, she's about 20 years younger than Tip. Don't know much about her, but we did find out she's Tip's wife. This is apparently her place, not theirs. They just separated a few months ago. There's a hell of a lot more we need to know, but we think it looks like a robbery. Somebody confronted them on the sidewalk, pulled a gun, walked them into the lobby, and then Tip probably did something stupid and got the both of them shot. By now, the crowd out front was getting bigger by the minute, and the first reporter had just shown up. John Dial went outside to handle it. Jason Deaton, L.A. Times. Do you know what happened? It looks to us like it might have been one of those street-type robberies of people entering their apartments, Dial said. It was an ambush. Somebody followed them just inside the lobby and shot the both of them. Dial told him that one victim was Irvin Tip Rader, the well-known local attorney. He was a block away at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, about to die of a single gunshot wound to the stomach. The other victim was Tip's young wife, Jennifer. Thanks, Deaton said. I'll give you a call to follow up, but I gotta file this now. Inside the lobby, Mike Thies kept staring at the dead woman on the floor. Even with half her face gone, she had a certain glamour about her. Perfect hair, perfect skin, impeccably dressed. Those kinds of women are a dime a dozen in Beverly Hills, but this woman looked, well, special. This was a town full of stars, and she certainly looked like a star. But Mike Thies knew his stars, and the name Jenny Rader didn't ring any sort of a bell. She's not in show business? Thies asked, still staring at her face. I can't place her, but she just looks familiar. No, not that we know of, Dial said. Just a poor woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. and married to an asshole. The next day, in the Los Angeles Times, Jason Deaton's story made the front page of the local section. The headline read, L.A. attorney, wife slain in apparent robbery attempt. This is how Jason Deaton spelled it out. Los Angeles criminal attorney Irvin M. Tip Rader, 60, and his wife Jennifer, 39, were killed by gunfire in an apparent robbery attempt as they entered their apartment lobby near the Beverly Hills, Los Angeles boundary Wednesday afternoon, Wilshire Division detectives said. Rader died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center 2.5 hours after the shooting of bullet wounds in the back and abdomen. His wife, who apparently also suffered a bullet wound in the back, died at the scene. Investigators said her purse and other possessions were found scattered at the scene. One detective suggested the crime may have been an ambush. Police had no leads on an assailant or assailants. Officers said they were looking into other possible motives as well as robbery. Jason Deaton was a hell of a good young crime reporter for the Times. Maybe a little too arrogant for his 27 years, but bright and smart, and very ambitious. He started at the paper as an intern in college, and even after they hired him on full-time, he did all the shit jobs you have to do when you're first starting out. They had him doing features, they put him on the school board beat, and then they gave him the crappiest beat of all, obituaries. Writing stories about dead people. Not how they died. That would have been interesting. No, he had to do stories about who they were. Some poor dumb schmuck who died of a heart attack at the age of 89 after spending his life as a PR man for Warner Brothers. Jason Deaton had to do stories about that guy. Boring as hell, and he hated it. In early 1980, though, they finally moved him up onto the crime beat, the beat he really wanted. The one he'd been begging for almost every day. 26-year-old kids straight out of UCLA's J School don't land on the Times crime beat every day. But Deaton had a moxie and a flair for the story that the editors loved, and after making him pay some dues, they figured he was ready for it. So here he was, a year later, on the scene of a brutal murder in the 300 block of Holt Avenue in Beverly Hills. And one of the dead guys was a local celebrity. For a rookie crime reporter, this is the kind of stuff that gets the blood pumping. Grisly murder case with a celebrity victim. And this made it even better. It was all his. For whatever reason, nobody else had a reporter on the scene. The Daily News wasn't there. The Santa Monica paper wasn't there. None of the TV stations or radio guys were there. The story belonged to Jason Deaton, and Jason Deaton alone. And he blew it. Aside from getting some basic facts wrong, Jenny wasn't shot in the back, she was shot in the head. Deaton missed the real story entirely. The story here wasn't that Tip Rader and his wife were gunned down. Tip was a local celebrity, but Jenny was far more famous, and Deaton had no clue about it. Jennifer Rader was actually Jenny Maxwell. And 20 years before, in 1961, she was the hottest young actress in Hollywood. She wasn't some bit player who had a few small walk-on roles. She was a star. 20 years ago, Jenny Maxwell was starring in episodes of Dr. Kildare and Bonanza and almost everything else. 20 years ago, Jenny Maxwell was on the cover of magazines and had her own fan club. And 20 years ago, the biggest thing of all, Jenny Maxwell was an Elvis girl. In every film he ever did, Elvis Presley always surrounded himself with beautiful girls, and they came to be known as Elvis Girls. The list was filled with some of the most gorgeous young starlets in the business, everyone from Tuesday Weld to Barbara Eden to Anne Margaret. And 20 years earlier, Jenny Maxwell was at the very top of that list. In 1961, she starred with the King in Blue Hawaii as the bratty sex kitten Ellie Corbett, and the chemistry between Elvis and Jenny was so strong that they decided to put the two of them together on all the publicity material. The most famous publicity still from that film had Jenny Maxwell on top of Elvis Presley's shoulders as he rode a fake surfboard. 20 years earlier, you saw Jenny Maxwell everywhere you looked. On film screens, on TV sets, on magazine covers, on the shoulders of Elvis Presley, for God's sake. At the age of 19, she was a blonde bombshell who had her agent's phone ringing off the hook. She had it all, including a future that was as bright as you could imagine. And now, 20 years later, she was lying dead in a condo lobby in Beverly Hills, and nobody had a clue who she really was. Not Mike Thies, the detective who thought he knew the face but not the name. Not John Dial or any of the other cops who were poring over the crime scene. And certainly not Jason Deaton, the reporter who had a much, much bigger story on his hands and didn't even know it. Go back and look at that headline from the Times. L.A. attorney, wife slain in apparent robbery attempt. Jenny Maxwell was the brightest young actress in Hollywood just 20 years earlier. And now, in a newspaper headline about her murder, she was relegated to being called simply wife. Not one word in the story about her acting career. Not one word in the story about sharing the screen with the likes of Jimmy Stewart and Robert Conrad. Not one word about her being an Elvis girl. No, she was just Tip Rader's dead wife. Jenny Maxwell was a Hollywood star. She knew legends like Frank Sinatra, Buster Keaton, Joe E. Brown, and Mae West. She starred with Michael Landon, Joey Bishop, Richard Chamberlain, and Sandra Dee. She played Robbie's girlfriend on My Three Sons, and she appeared in one of the most iconic episodes ever of The Twilight Zone. She was friends with Sharon Tate. Her best friend was Peggy Lipton. She was an Elvis girl. And as she laid there on the lobby of that condo on June 10th, 1981, with 2 bullets in her head, nobody knew it. They also didn't know the incredible story of her Hollywood rise and fall, a story filled with affairs, abuse, drugs, divorce, and more heartache than any one person should ever have to endure. They didn't know any of that. They didn't know the story of how she shot to stardom at the age of 16, and 10 years later, she was out of the business entirely, her life in shambles. In a newspaper headline about her murder, she was just wife. Jason Deaton blew it. He had a bigger story on his hands, and he didn't even know it. This was in the days long before the internet, so maybe if he had been able to Google her name, it would have popped up that Jennifer Rader was actually Jenny Maxwell. But even in 1981, with just a little bit of digging, he could have found out who the dead blonde in the lobby really was. But that wasn't the biggest mistake Jason Deaton made. The biggest mistake he made was that he never called Detective Mike Thies to follow up on the story. Deaton's attention got pulled in other directions, and for whatever reason, he decided it wasn't worth following up on the Tip Rader murder case. He never followed up, and neither did anyone else. Following that LA Times story on June 11th, 1981, the day after the murder, not another word was written in the newspapers about the Tip Rader, Jenny Maxwell murder. Which is too bad, because about a month later, Mike Thies and his partner solved the case, and it wasn't a robbery at all. It was one hell of a lot more than that. And the truth about who killed Jenny Maxwell and Tip Rader and why, has never come out publicly. Until now. Chapter 1. When Jenny first started to hit it big in Hollywood, her agent decided to play up 2 things: that she was Norwegian and that she was Marilyn Monroe's cousin. Neither one of them was true. Well, Jenny was Norwegian, in the sense that both of her parents and all of her ancestors were 100% pure-blood Norwegians. But Jenny was not Norwegian in the sense that she wasn't born there, she didn't grow up there, and in fact, in all her 39 years, she never once set foot there. No matter. When she got to Hollywood at the age of 16, and they decided how they were going to market her, it made her a whole lot more alluring to say that this beautiful young blonde was Norwegian. Jenny had rich, luxurious blonde hair, and she looked every bit the Scandinavian beauty. And they didn't just say she had Norwegian blood. No, her agent pushed the idea that Jenny was actually born in Norway and grew up there. That sounded a lot better than the truth, which was that she was born and grew up in Brooklyn. In every article early on, Jenny Maxwell was described as a Norwegian beauty. And indeed, Jenny's story does start in Norway, because that's where both of her parents were from. Johnny Maxwell, her dad, was born in 1910 in a tiny town north of Bergen called Mclain. That was, in fact, the family name, and the Mclains had a farm there that went back centuries. Mclain was green and beautiful and rolling, and you were surrounded by fjords everywhere you looked. Johnny Maxwell was born Jonas Mclain, one of 11 brothers and sisters, and they all lived in the same tiny farmhouse. When he got into his late teens, Jonas decided that his future would be much brighter in America, so he made the painfully tough decision to leave his family behind and sail to the States, part of a huge wave of Norwegian emigration to America that lasted nearly 100 years, from the 1830s to the 1930s. Jonas idolized his older brother Elling, the firstborn male in the family. Elling had moved to the States a few years prior and had made a trip back to Norway to see his family again. It was on that visit in 1928 that Elling convinced Jonas to come over too. "There are no jobs here, Elling," Jonas said. "They don't need my help on the farm, and I don't know what else I can do. Even if I move to Bergen or Oslo, they say there are no jobs anywhere." "Come back to America with me," Elling said. "It took me 1 week to find a job. The cities are so big and the women are beautiful. And there are so many Norwegians there. You feel like you never left home. You just need to learn how to speak English. If you go anywhere outside our community, they'll spit in your face if you don't speak English." Elling had settled in suburban Chicago, in a small town on the west side called Bensonville. There was a sizable Norwegian community there at the time, and before he left for the States, one of the families in Mclain arranged for Elling to stay with their Norwegian relatives in Illinois. Jonas wanted to live in the big city, though, and more specifically, he wanted to build things. He had a fascination with skyscrapers. He'd never seen one in person, but he had seen plenty of them in books, and he knew they were popping up all over America. Jonas wanted to help build skyscrapers. "Then you want to go to New York," Elling said. "We have skyscrapers in Chicago, but nothing like they have in New York." There were plenty of Norwegians in New York, too, so Jonas talked to some people in town and found a few connections in the Big Apple. He didn't want to be too far from his big brother, and in looking at some maps he knew that New York was just a 1-day train ride from Chicago. So, in early 1929, Jonas left his family in Mclain and sailed to New York. First stop, as it was for every immigrant from Europe, was the processing station at Ellis Island. "Next, name and nationality." "Jonas Mclain, Norge. Norway." "What did you say your name was, son?" "Mclain, Jonas Mclain." The immigration agent looked at Jonas's papers and at the spelling of his name. "Okay, you aren't going to be Jonas Mclain over here. Your first name is going to be John, and your last name, let's see. Your last name is going to be Maxwell. You're going to be John Maxwell." And just like that, in about 45 seconds at Ellis Island, is how Jonas Mclain became John Maxwell. A similar thing had happened 4 years earlier with Elling, except that Elling's immigration agent decided to let him keep his first name, and he changed Elling's last name to Jacobson. That's because Elling's father's name was Jacob, and Elling was Jacob's son. They changed Jacob to Jacob, and he became Jacobson. Elling Jacobson. That's why we have all the Johnsons and Petersons and Andersons in America today, because some guy at Ellis Island decided that John's son should be Johnson. So even though they were brothers, Elling Jacobson and John Maxwell had 2 different last names. A few years after Jonas came over, a third Mclain brother also came to America, and like Jonas, he too settled in New York. When he got to Ellis Island, Harold Meeksvall became Harold Jacobson. Different spelling, same concept. That's the story of how Jenny's Norwegian father came to America. The story of how her Norwegian mother came to the States is slightly different. Annie Bleivik, Jenny's mom, was 9 years younger than Jonas Meeksvall, having been born in 1919. And even though Annie and Jonas were both pure Norwegian, they didn't meet in Norway. They met in America. Annie grew up in a fishing village south of Bergen called Haugesund, one of 9 children. And this is the part of the story where Marilyn Monroe comes in. Marilyn Monroe's mother was Gladys Pearl Baker, but nobody knows for sure who Marilyn's father was. When Marilyn was born in 1926, though, Gladys wrote on the birth certificate that Marilyn's dad was a man named Martin Mortensen, whom Gladys had married in 1924 and separated from a few months later. Most Marilyn Monroe historians are adamant that Martin Mortensen was not her biological father. The common sentiment is that her biological dad was a man named Charles Stanley Gifford, a married man whom Gladys had an affair with. At the time Marilyn started to become famous in the 1940s, though, Martin Mortensen was reported to be her father. Just like Annie Bleivik, Martin's roots were in Haugesund, Norway, and people in Haugesund started to take great pride in that fact. Martin was born in California, but his father grew up in Haugesund, and once Marilyn became famous, the locals wasted no time claiming her as one of their own, even though she never set foot there. Even today, there's a statue of Marilyn Monroe that sits along the waterfront in Haugesund. The other thing that started to happen is that once Marilyn hit it big, lots of people in Haugesund started to claim they were related to her, including the Bleivik family. And while there's a chance that the Bleiviks and Mortensens were related, Haugesund was a relatively small town after all. If there is a relationship, it's a very distant one. Starting in the 1940s, though, the rumor stuck with the Bleivik family, so when Jenny was discovered in 1958, she immediately became known as Marilyn Monroe's cousin. When Jenny was introduced by Joan Crawford on a Bob Hope TV special in October 1960, Crawford referred to her as Marilyn Monroe's second cousin. Whatever. Hollywood is a town that's built on little white lies. This was their story, and they were sticking to it. Just like Jonas had done a few years earlier, Annie made the difficult decision to move to America in 1939 when she was 20, just as the World War was beginning. If Annie had stayed a few more months, she wouldn't have been able to leave at all, as the Germans were just getting ready to take over Norway in early 1940. 3 of her siblings came over to America too, while the rest stayed behind. Annie settled with a Norwegian family in Washington, D.C. Johnny Maxwell found work right away doing what he loved, building skyscrapers. Remember that iconic photograph of the construction workers all sitting on an I-beam high above Manhattan eating their lunches? That was Johnny Maxwell's life. In early 1940, Johnny went down to Washington for a long weekend to visit some Norwegian friends who were hosting a party. He struck up a conversation with the shy new girl from Haugesund. "My name's Johnny Maxwell," he said. "I'm from a town you've never heard of near Bergen, called Meeksvall." "You're from around Bergen?" "Me too. Haugesund." "I know Haugesund," Johnny said. "Went fishing there once with my brother. Didn't catch anything, but I remember the girls were beautiful." Annie giggled. "I've been here almost 10 years, Johnny said. You need to know anything, you can just ask me." Their conversation lasted well into the night, and 2 weekends later, Johnny was back in Washington seeing her again. Less than a year later, in 1941, they were married at Trinity Lutheran Church in Brooklyn. That same year, they became parents. It's ironic because they both came from huge families, 11 kids in the Meeksvall family and 9 kids in the Bleivik clan, But Johnny and Annie had only one child. Their little girl was born on September 3rd, 1941, and she looked as Scandinavian as any baby possibly could. "Johnny, I can already see she looks like my mother," Annie said as she cradled the little blonde baby. "Can we name her after my mother? Can we name her Jenny?" "Of course," Johnny said, "of course. We'll name her after both of our mothers." Annie's mom was Jenny Blyvik, and Johnny's mom was Helena Meeksfall, so they settled on Jennifer Helena Maxwell as her name. Johnny gave the baby a kiss on the forehead. "Papa älskar dig, Jenny," he said. "Daddy loves you." As Annie laid there in the hospital bed with Jenny in her arms and Johnny at her side, she began to sing the Norwegian nursery rhyme that her own mother had sung to her so many times as a little girl. "Row, row till fiskeskär. Row, row to the fishing reef." It's about a little girl who catches a fish for each person in her family, and 2 for herself. "Row, row till fiskeskär. Många fiskar får vi där. In till far och in till Moor. In till Susser, in till Beror. O tu till den som fisken fick. O det var lilla Jenny." Chapter 2. Home for the Maxwell family was a 2-story Brooklyn brownstone at 556 72nd Street. Johnny was working steadily as a construction worker building skyscrapers in Manhattan, while Annie stayed home to take care of their little girl. Jenny grew up a happy, vibrant child, and she basked in the fact that as an only child, she had her parents' undivided love and attention. For Johnny and Annie Maxwell, Jenny was their whole world. Every day when Johnny came home after a brutally long day at work, he always had a treat for Jenny. Some days it would be a flower, some days it would be an apple, some days it would be a doll. "Where's my baby girl?" he'd say when he came through the door. "Where's my Jenny Penny?" "I'm here, Daddy. What did you bring me today?" "It's behind my back. Guess." "A doll?" "No, it's this." It was a new hairbrush. "Oh, Daddy, thank you." As a 6-year-old girl, there was nothing Jenny loved more than brushing her hair and stealing her mommy's makeup and putting on dresses and bows. There was no tomboy in her, and Johnny knew it. The other thing Jenny loved was getting cards and letters, and even the occasional visit from one of her cousins. As an only child, Jenny had no siblings to play with, so she craved all the attention she could get from her cousins, even though they all lived far away. In the summer of 1948, when Jenny was 7, her cousin Vera June Jacobson, Uncle Elling's daughter, came from Illinois to visit for 2 weeks. Vera June was 6 years older than Jenny, and Jenny adored her. Vera June was 13, and theater was her whole life, so she and Jenny spent all day and night putting together plays to show the other kids in the neighborhood. Vera June would write out a script, and she and Jenny would rehearse it all day long. They would come up with costumes and scenery, and put on makeup, of course. And then they would invite the neighborhood into the Maxwell living room to see the show. Jenny loved every last second of it, and when it was time for Vera June to get on the train to go back to Illinois, it broke her heart. The day that changed the course of Jenny Maxwell's life forever was September 5th, 1953. That Saturday afternoon, Annie took Jenny into Manhattan to Radio City Music Hall to see a new movie called Roman Holiday. Annie and Jenny went to the movies all the time, but this experience was special. Roman Holiday tells the story of a bored and sheltered princess who takes a trip to Rome and falls in love with an American newsman. It starred Gregory Peck as the newsman and a brilliant young actress named Audrey Hepburn as the princess, in her first starring role. As 12-year-old Jenny sat there in one of the most grandiose theaters in the world, watching Audrey Hepburn on the big screen, she fell in love. She fell in love with the majestic grace and beauty of Audrey Hepburn. She fell in love with the power of the cinema, the idea that a bunch of flickering pictures on a massive screen
Sample complete. Ready to continue?